Ms. Mitton, you're up.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. I do want to follow up a bit on the issue of how this all began, because I do think that that is important. I'm wondering, did you look at the lobbyist registry in correlation with the different companies that that were contracted to provide the private nursing agency services?
Looking at the people that lobbied for a contract was not part of the scope of our work. We concentrated on the management oversight and the responsible bodies that had the right to make the decision on contracting that service.
Okay. And I understand there's limits to the scope of your work. I'm just wondering about, I guess I'm wondering about this issue, like how it happens, where these ideas come from. I'm also wondering, are you considering looking further into where this came from, or looking further into more broadly other facets of healthcare privatization? I know that there have been some people calling for that, and I'm wondering, is your office working on looking at that issue more broadly?
Any privatization decisions around health would be a government policy decision, which we do not weigh in. We audit government to the policies and so on that they set and establish and the direction they take. With respect to the travel nurse contracts, I mean, we look at the signatures on the contract and did they have the authority, and they are the ones that ultimately have that decision-making power and signed off on it. So for us, that's where the buck stops, and that's the accountability. We are considering, I mean, I'm very proud of my team. I'll digress a little here. You know, we only did this work, what you're seeing in front of you has been put together in not much more than 3 months. We wanted to make sure this is an important matter. Our findings were, I thought, quite serious. Wanted to get this out as quickly as I can. It's not lost on me, though, that it's a piece of this, and we're considering whether or not there's more that needs to be done and just what that would be. But I don't want that to sound like a guarantee. We want to make sure if we have limited resources, we want to make sure if we do more, there's something valid that we're going to have to come back to you with that's worth your time and energy as well.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And I do understand what you're saying, not weighing in terms of the policy. In terms of just looking at other aspects, I do hope that there's more to look at, what the contracts look like in other pieces of healthcare, whether basically the province is getting the best bang for its buck, all of that. So that's sort of what I was asking, yeah.
If I may, we have been in discussions with I've been in discussions with the Auditor General for Newfoundland, who is also taking on a review of the nursing contracts, and there could be areas that they're finding information on that we hadn't seen or considered. That in itself may give us pause to say, if they found it there, is it something here we should be looking at? So we're having regular discussions with Ms. Hanrahan there.
Okay, thank you. And I am glad to see this come forward so quickly. I was almost surprised at just because it hasn't been that long. So I appreciate your office working on this. And speaking of how part of your job was to look at who signed contracts and how all of that worked, I'm wondering if you can speak to how the government ended up not being party to contracts. I believe that was in the social development section. Can you explain how that happened?
And this is probably a good reason for those legal review of the contracts. So there was an error simply made where the ADM was listed in the contract. I believe they were meant to be listed as a contact, and they ended up being listed as party to the contract rather than the province of New Brunswick.
Okay. And so what is the consequence of that, or could be the consequence of that?
I would have social development defer that to their legal people to answer you. I wouldn't want to guess on the legalities.
Okay. There's a lot in here that it's hard to know sort of where to start and to process it all. Can you speak more to the fact that 47% of travel expenses that were paid by social development did not have supporting documentation? I feel like my question keeps on just being, how does this happen? How did that happen? That is very significant. Can you speak to how you think that happened?
Yeah, the Department of Social Development was receiving the invoices pursuant to the contract for services given to provided to nursing homes, long-term care facilities, and it goes to, again, making sure you've done good contract management, what's to be provided for support or evidence. There was no apparent follow-up with the nursing home or submission by them to indicate that, the person had arrived, that matching of the service being received by the entity versus the payment. The bills were coming in, being received, and simply being paid. So proper due diligence at the corporate services level was not being maintained.
Are there other types of similar contracts or processes that social development would need to go through where they would have the appropriate staff to be dealing with this type of work? Is there something comparable where, I'm trying to understand, did they not have people who were trained to do it properly? Was there not enough staff to do it? Can you point to anything that would help explain this?
Getting support for the payment of invoices to basically ensure you've received the goods and services. This is not new. This is a standard internal control. I've been an accountant a long time. This isn't new. They taught me this 40 years ago. This is policy. There are policies in place that state you are to ensure you've received the goods and services before payment. Somewhere in here, the internal controls, I would argue, had failed. Whether that is improper training or insufficient staff, that's a great question to ask the department for their thoughts on it. Government is a big organization, and we should not be operating with these things happening. This, I do respect that this was at a time of COVID, and a lot of things were being rushed, and needs of care homes and everything was a priority, but it doesn't dismiss your responsibility to ensure proper controls and practices are in place when it comes to spending and the payments.
Mm-hmm. And you bring up COVID. Can you speak more to the correlation or lack of correlation between instances of COVID and actual contracts? Can you explain what you found?
I'll take social development as an example since we're just talking about them. We were told that, of course, they were there trying to assist the long-term care facilities at a time with COVID and a time where staff were out sick with COVID, that they had caught it. So, of course, we tried to do analysis of that. However, the approach by which long-term care facilities could request nursing assistance was not data-driven. So simply a nursing home, long-term care facility would contact social development where we need help, we don't have sufficient staff, can you send them? There may have been other reasons we're not aware of. We were told it was to correlate and cover off COVID-19 staff absences. The data doesn't substantiate that.
So that's concerning that that was the reason given and that the data doesn't substantiate that. However, yeah, there's no doubt that there are staffing shortages in nursing homes, in the long-term care sector, and that there have been recruitment retention issues in that sector for a long time. So I'm not surprised to hear about that the nursing homes were asking for that assistance. Going back to some of the actual expenses, I'm very curious about the gift cards. So in your report, it says gift cards were purchased in denominations of $100 and $250, totaling $6,405. Can you tell us what those gift cards were for?
Could you direct me to which paragraph number you're looking at?
Yes.
Please. Thank
So
you.
it is under 2.58. It's on page 18 in the English. And near recommendation 2.59.
And it would go to why we raised it. I mean, gift cards are like cash, and we have no idea what the amounts were used for. They were simply on the invoices submitted and paid intact.
I'm wondering, was it gift cards for gas, gift cards for groceries, or it just said gift cards?
We were informed it was for gas. However, there was nothing to substantiate whether they were used for that purpose or not.
Okay. I'm not often speechless, but it is just very concerning, the lack of proper documentation. And I mean, in your report, you outline many different types of examples. Can you tell us, how hard was it to get your hands on these documents? Were they filed clearly? I'm wondering what type of bookkeeping was happening. Are they in a pile on a desk? I don't know. If you can give any details on on this, it just feels like maybe it wasn't on anyone's radar.
And I hope I'm getting to the answer to your question here in what I'm going to provide. The way that the government accounting system works for accounts payable, documentation is scanned into the system, and so there's a linkage between what goes through the accounts payable system and the attached supporting documents. So there's PDFs that are actually embedded in the government accounts payable system for whatever people put in it. That's supposed to be the support for the payment.
Okay.
And that was the information with which we were going through one by one to determine. If there was additional information and they failed to put it in there, then we would not, it wouldn't be considered at all.
Okay, and so there were documentation, but it was things like just paid cash, not much detail.
There would in fact be an invoice, but it'd be an invoice for whatever the number is, and maybe it tells you a date, a range, maybe it doesn't. Oh, yes,
Okay.
we have a sample there on the English page 16. If you were to look there, there's an actual example of an invoice provided by CHL. Mm-hmm. And so it just shows a date, a weekly date, long-term home services, TLC services provided by CHL, quantities, which mean nothing, it still is, which then drive times the daily rate for the team, which was $9,995 at that time. and there's your invoice for $321,000 as an example. And so there's no timesheets, no indication who was at which nursing home, nothing else to help you understand what you actually received for $321,000.
Okay. And, I mean, I think Canadian Health Labs is laughing all the way to the bank. Like, they have had quite a lucrative time in New Brunswick so far. This package deal, can you speak more to that? That I find quite shocking. And it sounds like it was not always even in response to the needs required, but like it's a package deal. Can you speak more to that?
A couple of comments that I think are useful for some perspective here. Horizon didn't hire CHL, and we noted in paragraph 2.80 that there were 37 agencies that submitted proposals to Horizon. So there are people out there providing these services. So let's be clear that, gee, there's only one or two to go to. Well, Horizon found 37. I don't know who they all are, but sounds like there's some fish in the pond. When we look at Vitalité, and this was something that wasn't in the social development contract, but is very concerning, and that's paragraph 2.144 with this CHL contract, is one of the main reasons we keep getting told they needed CHL was for French language services, and that I don't know if any of these other companies could have provided that. We did not evaluate that. However, the contract management is quite scary because there is this auto renewal clause in here. So that, plus the fact that in 2.142, teams can be deployed regardless of need. In other words, there's a minimum requirement purchase from CHL. So first of all, they're going to get paid money this year if you don't use them. Secondly, they keep renewing for an extended length of time of up to 5 terms. So, yeah, I bet a lot of people would love to get a contract like this. And I would challenge government to do better, way better. This is not good.
We'll now go to Ms. Mitton.
Merci. J'aimerais demander des questions sur les contrats avec Vitalité. Et je vais commencer par dire que tout le monde sait, on a une crise dans nos systèmes de soins de santé. Ça fait longtemps, et dans nos régies, et ça n'a pas commencé en 2022, ça a commencé même avant la pandémie. Mais je veux demander des questions à propos des contrats. Est-ce que vous pouvez parler des détails de l'exigence ou comme la manque d'une exigence pour Vitalité dans ces contrats d'avoir des services en français? Je vois qu'il fallait avoir comme au moins 0% du personnel déployé à Campbellton, par exemple, qui serait francophone ou bilingue. Est-ce que vous pouvez parler de cette exigence? Et est-ce que vous avez vu quelque chose à propos de la langue dans les contrats avec Horizon ou le développement social?
Vitalité, some of the details around the contract requirements for the French are outlined in paragraph 2.127, and it's very specific around. There was 3 different contracts at different times that got revised for changes in pricing and changes in the request for bilingual staff, which commenced in July 29th, 2002 for RNs and LPNs, with team who's deployed at Dumont be, at no point should the team be less than 50% bilingual functional. But for any other, for Campbellton, 0% had to be deployed as bilingual. Contract 2 came in November and went from 0% in Campbellton Bathurst to be francophone to having Dumont and Edmundston being required to be at least 80% functional. And then the third contract in December of 2022, again, Campbellton Bathurst remained 0, staff deployed had to be bilingual, but for Dumont and Edmundston had to be no less than 90% functional and bilingual. To our knowledge, with the social development contract with CHL and Plan A, no one was bilingual or wasn't mandated in the contract, and Horizon either. There was no requirements to have bilingual staff within those contracts that we identified.
D'accord. Et est-ce que vous pouvez clarifier le contrat qui peut avoir un maximum de 5 renouvellements? Quel contrat est-ce que c'est? Est-ce que c'est l'un qui a été signé en décembre 2022? Je veux juste clarifier quel niveau d'avoir une équipe bilingue est requis pour atteindre ces buts pour être renouvelés automatiquement.
Yes. Yes, you're right. The contract that requires the 90% bilingual is the RN LPN. We say it, yes, it says December 2nd on the other page, but it does correlate with the December 5th to February 5th contract on paragraph 2.142.
OK, alors le contrat 3. Et pour celui-là, ça dit au moins 0% du personnel déployé à Campbellton et à Bathurst sera francophone ou bilingue. Alors, CHL n'a pas besoin d'envoyer des infirmières francophones ou bilingues à Campbellton ou à Bathurst pour avoir un renouvellement de leur contrat. OK. Et comme je suis vraiment surprise de voir cette idée d'un renouvellement automatique. Je pense que c'est vraiment un problème. Et aussi d'avoir un régie francophone. Je sais que les régies offrent des services bilingues, mais le régie francophone de ne pas avoir quelque chose pour assurer avoir des personnes bilingues ou francophones, comme 0%. Je suis vraiment surprise. Est-ce que vous pouvez parler de... c'est sur page 40 dans le français, c'est paragraphe 2.122, non-conformité à la politique du conseil d'administration. Est-ce que vous pouvez expliquer ça et qu'est-ce qui s'est passé? Parce qu'il y avait des événements en juillet 2022 où les conseils d'administration des régies de santé n'existaient plus. Est-ce que vous pouvez parler de ce qui s'est passé avec ça, s'il vous plaît?
At the time, yes, 2.120. So Vitalité would normally take these contracts to their board for approval. At the time, the board was disbanded and the trustee was in place. The trustee would then have those powers for oversight and approval of the contract. Now, we indicate here there was no documented evidence of that approval. In accordance with the policy. Now, excuse me one moment. So, Vitalite may be able to give more insight as to whether the person knew, didn't know, what their thoughts were on it, but certainly the proper documentation was not there to support that the trustee had approved it.
OK, alors c'est possible qu'il y avait quelque chose informel, mais pas les documents nécessaires qui sont supposés d'être là. OK. Je veux aussi demander à propos du paragraphe 2.131, l'enjeu des tarifs qui varient d'un fournisseur à l'autre. C'est vraiment problématique de voir des différences entre les différentes options. Et je ne savais pas qu'il y avait des personnels virtuels qui ont été embauchés dans ces plans. Est-ce que vous pouvez parler de ça, avec un coût de 18 000 $ pour 12 heures de service par jour? Il y avait des personnes qui travaillaient là, dans l'hôpital, mais aussi des personnes qui travaillaient ailleurs. Est-ce que vous pouvez expliquer ça, s'il vous plaît?
In the case of the virtual staff, there was no evidence provided with the invoices to show that what these people did or who these virtual staff were or the time they put in. In some cases, I believe it might have been in social development section, I think we indicate that they just simply stated they did not use the virtual staff. If they were doing anything, it was not at their direction. Their goal was to get the in-person staff on the floor. There was very little indication, if almost none at all, to indicate what these virtual staff didn't do, or that they were of any value to the operations at all. At the end, you're buying a bundled price, and you got this, and that's what you were paying for.
Okay, so the details here are for the Vitalite contract with CHL, and it looks like basically 2.5 work positions for a day would be virtual. So we don't know if those got used, how that worked. And then you're saying for social development, they didn't really get used, but they did have virtual as part of the package for social development?
Social Development's response to us was that they didn't need the virtual people. They had their own schedulers, and so they did not, in their mind, they did not need those people that were offered virtually.
Okay. Did they pay for them, though?
Absolutely.
Okay. So they were paying...
Again, it was part of that bundled price. So once you hired your RNs and LNs, or your
LPNs.
Your RNs, LPNs, you paid the bundled price, whether you used them or not.
Do you have it broken down for social development, what the team looked like, the way you do for Vitalite?
Yes, I refer you to paragraph 2.25. Now, you will note that social development's price per day was $9,995, not $18,000. However, still significantly more than the other contract. And yes, it was a two-person, or the equivalent of 2 people virtual, and you have 8 people there between the logistics manager, PSWs, RN, and LPN. So a different mix in terms of RNs and LPNs.
Yeah, they needed different things, or they were offered different things for their package deal, but basically equivalent of 2 staff people per day that were virtual staff were not used, but were paid for by the Department of Social Development.
2.26, the department informed us they did not need several of the staff categories provided in the bundled price, as they had their own schedulers, logistics staff, and clinical leads.
Okay, so more than just the virtual, also the, like, I guess the logistics manager, for example.
That's correct.
Okay. Can you, the price difference is quite shocking. Can you speak to any type of, well, and I guess you're basically saying there was no selection criteria for choosing, for example, to go with CHL, which forced you to have a package deal of basically $10,000 for 8-hour day, which is like, you know, significantly more than what it seems like other companies were offering. And you said there were 37 options that Horizon identified. Can you speak to the criteria or lack of criteria in choosing these vendors?
Really, with social development and Vitalite, there was no established matrix or anything to evaluate the proposals submitted. As indicated, Horizon did, forgive me if I don't get the term right, whether they had some guidelines, overall overriding guidelines that they had in their selection, but they also did not set out any sort of matrix or evaluation process to actually grade the proposals and do a bit more detailed documentation of who and why.
Okay, so they maybe went a bit further in terms of like having contracts looked at by the Office of the Attorney General, not all of the contracts though, and having different proposals submitted, but still not a concrete like decision-making process that someone could point to and say, oh, they chose because of this, these were the criteria for any of these.
I would say they did more due diligence than social development and Vitalite. However, there are improvements we've recommended in our recommendations.
Mm-hmm. So for Vitalite, you indicated that in terms of hiring Canadian health labs, that Vitalite said CHL, one of the reasons they chose it was because of language. Do you know if that was at all part of the decision-making for social development? That seems to be the only possible decision-making criteria that I can see for that's identified at least for Vitalite. I'm wondering, did that at all come up in discussions with the Department of Social Development?
Social development indicate that there was no decision criterion determining which providers to contract with.
I am so concerned with not having procurement processes that, well, I guess just not having procurement processes, not even able to evaluate if they were good or not, if they don't exist, for a government department, for example. Again, I find myself speechless. I can't, it's hard to comprehend some of this stuff. I don't have a lot of time left in this round of questioning, so I must ask, I'm going to jump to the trust fund, the mental health trust fund number 9. So the fact that it's called number 9 makes me wonder, is there a 1 through 8? Can you answer that, please?
Perhaps there was back in 1977. That is the actual legal name of the trust. That was what was in the trust document and what was in the Board of Management minute. And we wondered the same thing. We did not find any other trusts 1 through 8.
It's expiring. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Monsieur Book. Ms. Mitton?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So you'll be coming back on Thursday morning, and so we'll have a chance to examine this further. And I know I will have more questions. One place that I find interesting to look at in Auditor General reports is the actual section with the recommendations and responses from whoever's been audited. And so I am looking at that section for Vitalité Health Network 2.119. And so this recommendation is use of data to ensure staffing resources are assigned to facilities facing the most risks. And there's quite a lengthy response from Vitalité indicating where they were allocating staff resources. For example, with hemodialysis, indicating 60 patients would have remained untreated with a risk of death, for example. And so I'm just wondering, can you explain your recommendation as I feel like the recommendation and then the Auditor General's response after that feels like they're missing each other in terms of like the recommendation and what the RHA is responding with.
Question? No. When we commenced our audit and investigation into the travel nurses, our scope and our question in the initial stages was about what was driving the need for the travel nurses, and we were focusing in on staff absences due to COVID-19. And so that was our inquiry with Vitalité, and there was no information or correlation that gave us that. Now, the response which we got at the end of our audit, if there were other factors or things that were driving that, this is what was provided to us at the end of the audit after we'd given them the draft report, and they gave us their responses to our scope and to our finding. However, our inquiry was simply, do you have documentation on the staff absences due to COVID-19? And they're saying there's other drivers and other reasons they needed people, but that was, again, this was given to us at the end of the audit and not in any way, nothing that was correlated to the COVID-19 staff absences.
Okay. Did they early on indicate that the reason that they had contracted was because of COVID-19, or was that just the premise with, like, for the work that you were doing?
The initial, we were initially told that the reason for the initial contracting of the travel nurses was around the staff absences with COVID-19.
Okay, by Vitalité.
By all parties in this case, and all of these, they proceeded to, they did get proper exemptions under the Procurement Act to do this directly and choose who they wanted. Then other processes failed in the approach. So, however, the initial reasons for contracting these were initially related to staff absences due to COVID-19.
Okay, and so COVID-19 opened the door, one could say.
After that, whether their reasons changed or other reasons may have come into play, I think that's where this has gone here and why they continue to utilize them.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I'm aware of the time that we have left. I guess I want to just make a comment that just related to the next recommendation there, and just that Vitalité indicates that, well, and I'll quote them, under 2.124, that it is important to note that the use of agency staff was endorsed by the Department of Health. And we know that a big section of your report today is also looking at the Department of Social Development. And so, so that is very concerning. Several times today, I've heard the Auditor General say that those would be good questions to ask the department or one of the RHAs. And so I would like to move a motion, Mr. Chair. And I guess I'll first say thank you for being here today, for answering our questions, and I look forward to asking more questions on Thursday morning. I'm going to move that the Standing Committee on Public Accounts requests the Department of Social Development, Vitalité Health Network, and Horizon Health Network appear before June 30th, 2024. Et en français, que le Comité permanent des comptes publics demande au ministère du Développement social, au réseau de santé Vitalité et au réseau de santé Horizon de comparaître devant lui avant le 30 juin 2024. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
So it has been moved by Ms. Mitton that the Standing Committee on Public Accounts requests the Department of Social Development, Vitalité Health Network, and Horizon Health Network to appear before June 30th, 2024. Any comments or discussion on the motion? And also, members, we are 6 minutes away from a hard stop. Do we want to discuss this today, or do we need to set this aside and possibly deal with it at the next meeting? If there's no discussion, we can proceed to a vote.
All those in favor of the motion?
All right. All in favor of the motion, signify by saying yea. Yea. Opposed, nay. Motion carried. There we go. Member?
Am I pushing it?
There is about 5 minutes left, so yes, you can ask another question.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do want to ask another question for today, and then we'll continue on Thursday. And I want to thank the committee for passing that motion. I wanted to ask about the issue of criminal record checks, vulnerable sector, and social development checks. So can you speak to, was there evidence of why these weren't done and how often they were done? It seemed like the ball was dropped for at least most of the contracts. Can you speak to the issue of these checks not getting done?
So thank you for the question. I think refer you to, just to put some context to this finding and recommendation, 2.41 and 2.42 under the social development section for the travel nurse contracts. So social development is the only one of the three that requires the social development checks. They do that internally for their own purposes. And there's two matters to bring to everyone's attention here to be clear. One is whether or not it was in the contract, and then whether or not the department did it and acted upon it if they found anything. 2.42 for social development, Plan A submitted 237 social development record checks, of which 6 were deemed unacceptable. Yet social development informed us they did not obtain SD record checks on the CHL employees. And that was where they spent the most money. So Plan A, they did it, found 6 unacceptable. Why didn't they do the record check on the other contract? So it's a question of it, A, not being or not being in the contract, which runs rampant in different contract to contract, seems to be varying here. So with the other contracts, then there's the criminal record check and the, forgive me, the vulnerable sector check. So it seems to be just hit and miss whether it's in the contract, but then just the fact it's not being done, or there could be findings there. What risks are there to the long-term care sector, to people in the healthcare sector, or patients, New Brunswickers in the hospitals? What does that bring that is being missed? So I just want to make sure that we're thinking about the two sides. One is the contract, one is the Crown or departmental responsibility, and what did they do or what did they do about it? And it seems like there was a ball dropped.
Thank you very much for that. Members, I've been informed that there was an omission on the motion and that health should have been on that motion. There's 2 ways to deal with this. We can submit a new motion, or we can just